let's get started.
Okay, so we're back with world politics again, and we're going to be discussing the escalating dispute between the Federal Reserve Chair and the broader conflict with the federal leadership by Donald Trump. And we need to discuss that is Mustafa. I'm still Afolabi. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, so we know Powell came out yesterday and made a controversial statement that Trump is trying to get rid of him because he basically wants to use the federal court system to get rid of him so he can basically have control of the Fed and cut interest rates to do whatever he wants. That's clearly true. It's clearly true. He wants to drop the interest rates, first of all, because he wants to have a small boom in economy that would come from the interest rates and people taking out more loans, which can help him politically and strengthen up the Republicans before the midterms. Second of all, he wants to control this because he's made so many cuts in social programs and everything, but still wants to fund military adventures in Venezuela against Iran and those types of things. And that's going to cost money. And it would make the deficit even worse or if the interest rates were too high. So he wants lower interest rates so he can quickly get cheap loans to continue imperial activities. Second of all, and this is the boomerang of how it affects Americans like Renee Good, who got shot, is that he wants to also spend money on ICE and on Federal Reserve and all these things to keep the population under control because the population is getting out of control because there isn't social spending. So it's like a circle. You see what's going on, Afalabi? Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of this is tied to the interest rates because they can control the interest rates. They can keep the debt down and stop an insurrection in the country because of high prices. But at the same time, they need to fund keeping everything under control as people get restless because of the economy, and also to fund imperial activities. And the idea that eventually those imperial activities, like taking over the oil in Venezuela, and then also weakening BRICS and Iran will help the dollar so that eventually they can pay off everything, all of these loans. That's what he thinks. They can pay off all these loans and justify the loans. But it just becomes a spiral where it gets more out of control, where you have to spend more on imperialism and war. You have to spend more on suppressing people in America and getting people like Renee Good shot. And then you have to spend, and then you also have to keep uh, prices lower by giving people more credit. So it's just going to continue spiraling out of control. What do you think?
Yeah, basically, if you look at this, it's a very interesting one. And there's so much pressure, aggressive pressure for cutting interest rates. I think Trump basically believes that the Fed should cut the rates faster in order to boost growth and markets and basically give him political leverage. But Powell insists that if this must be done, it must be data driven based on inflation and some other statistics. And if you look
Yeah.
at this, basically the Federal Reserve is fighting for its autonomy. Political and legal pressure on the Federal Reserve threatens, the long-standing norm that, monetary policies, just like the CBN, monetary policy decisions should be insulated from political influence.
Oh,
Otherwise,
but here's my go
yeah.
ahead. Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
Otherwise, it's not going to help because the market is very uncertain and volatile. And if they don't, take these decisions based on data, that our feedback gotten from the way these things operate, especially investors, if investors react negatively to the threats to the federal autonomy, it leads to swings and uncertainty in equities and bonds, and even the US dollar would be affected. That's just what I feel.
Yeah, but here's the problem. If just like the U.S. Supreme Court and everything, none of this is guaranteed in the Constitution. The Congress wants the Fed Reserve to be autonomous, but it hasn't passed any laws which prevent the president from taking over. And I say this is the problem with America, that America is actually a capitalistic, finance-based economy in which the ruling class can do whatever they want, and the political will chooses the politicians. Money chooses the politicians. The politicians use the money to choose the Supreme Court and everybody. They use the military. Money drives how the military functions. And also now you're seeing money is going to drive how the Fed. So this is the result of an American system in which there's no ironclad rule that the Fed has to react independently. Same thing. There's no ironclad rule that as a lobbyist, you can't just pay a politician and have them do whatever they want. So this is the American system, and it's not guaranteed in the American Constitution that the Fed will be independent. So my argument is that the American system, and I've been saying this for years, nobody wants to listen to me. The Constitution needs to be changed to guarantee all these things. In other countries like Russia and in Europe and in China, their Constitution guarantees that this type of manipulation can't be used. So, in other words, America needs to start looking forward towards socialism. And one of the first tenets of socialism is that the economic policies have to have set rules which can't go against data, which can't go against the well-being of the United States. So, this is more of not of a critique of Trump trying to take over the Fed Reserve because he can, because the Constitution guarantees him that right. And there are no laws made by Congress and Senate to change it. So, the real question is, Powell is right. He's trying to take over, but it's a critique of the system, which means he can take over it because the American system of politics is based on which money determines everything. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, basically, I haven't clarified that now. It appears it will be difficult for the Federal Reserve to take that stance because, like you said, if there's no constitutional reform and it's not cast in stone or written in black and white, that the politicians are insulated from the autonomous decision of the Federal Reserve, then it's going to be very, very difficult because the financial institutions have to work on their own in the sense that, if they are politicized, it could affect a lot of personal interest, basically,
Yeah,
especially the strength of the dollar. And people that
yeah,
are investing from outside, to a large extent, their investment propensity depends on how insulated those financial institutions are, basically. And they won't be
yeah.
willing to take so much risk if they know that people can just step in and take
Well,
decisions.
well, what happens? So what that's showing is that even the corporate sector of America is now going to fall apart because even they don't have the interest. Like you saw the guy from Exxon say, "There's no way we're going to go and invest in Venezuela because it's
True.
not making money." So what happens now is that what you see with Trump, and this is where I'm going to end the show today. We'll continue. What you see with Trump now is America's going back to feudalism. A few people, Elon Musk, who's his Kushner, his son-in-law, Trump, and a few crony capitalists who are just about printing paper and finance and not actually about proper corporate investments are basically raiding the U.S. Treasury. By lowering those interests, most of these loans are going to benefit their things because when they lower the interest rate, they've cut education. They've even cut the IRS, the tax. So there's not even a tax system in America, where it's becoming so they can't even monitor all the taxes because they've cut that as a government program. So they've cut everything, and basically through services and running all the mechanisms, all the money's going into their pockets. So what you're going to see in America is a few people are going to have trillions of dollars, and the money's not going to be worth anything, but maybe they are going to find a way to diversify in Europe or with Russia or something to keep themselves going. But eventually, this whole thing is going to explode to the point where there won't be the money in America will not be worth anything. It's probably 50, 60, 100 years down the line, but this is the way they're going. So you're right. Investment by businesses will be they want to invest because of loans. So what is going to happen? America will not have businesses anymore or corporations. It'll just have a few pirates in the State Department. That's why they have to go to countries all over the world to raid them. Go to Nigeria, go to Venezuela, go to keep themselves going. But the rest of the country will be cannibalized. Last thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what this actually position, like I as an investor, if I take a position against the two entities, that is personal, Donald Trump, or political, and then institutional, the Federal Reserve, it's going to make people not trust the White House and the federal leadership
But here's
anymore.
the question. We already know that they don't trust them. But what the question is, will they care? The people in the White House and Trump and those guys will still be making money. So why would they care about the trust?
Of course, yeah.
So my question is, you tell me how far. I want you to think independently about this. Why would Trump care about them trusting him if he's controlling everything?
Of course, he doesn't give a damn anyway. And of course, if you look at it, there's this narrative that he professes the Federal Reserve as being unaccountable, and it doesn't allow them to be, allow itself to be democratically controlled. But I don't know how the U.S. works, but there should also be an independent body that
No, there's
regulates.
nothing independent. It's just a given rule. This is why I
Okay,
said
it's a
the
given
laws
rule.
aren't in place.
Okay.
The laws
So,
aren't in place.
so, so
And
in essence, nobody regulates the Fed Reserve and
no,
control.
I'll tell you who's supposed to regulate all of this. Okay, is so the courts. But the problem is that
The
even the people who
courts.
regulate it, even the courts themselves are run by money. So the problem is every single group sector of America where there's checks and balances, there's money behind it. Do you see
Okay,
what I'm
so
saying?
everybody's
So
basically compromised.
if there was, in order to have true autonomy, you'd have to have something like communism or socialism, in which is
Socialism, of course.
in the Constitution that this thing has to be. And even then, there's no way we can ever be tell if there are forces behind who are controlling the people, because any system, even if there's a system that has a constitution and everything that's put in place, it still has to be run by people, and people are corruption. So I end with this: the actual problem is corruption. Even if all the mechanisms are in the US, they'll just be corruption so they could break the law. Now, very quickly, so Megan Good was shot in the head because of ICE. The reason you're seeing ICE and all this stuff on the streets with National Guard is because there's unrest in America, which is part of the social and economic decline of the country because of the deficit and spending on military and everything else other than internally. And what Trump is trying to do is to make that cycle worse by making loans to continue that cycle, make them the loans less expensive so that the deficit doesn't get to 40 trillion and there's a civil war or there's an insurrection. Last thoughts on that, and we're out. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically you're right about that. And if you look at the way this thing is panning out, it just means that even if everything, the Federal Reserve was autonomous, it can't be 100% autonomous because it's also compromised to an extent because
Yeah.
of corruption at the end of the
Corruption.
day. And you rightly mentioned ICE and all these things. If you look at everything, the way it is, since it's not a socialist system, it's compromised and it can't be 100% insulated from,
Yeah. And
political.
ICE is actually American fascism to to keep people to keep people who are in unrest, to silence them. So and the reason they need to be silenced is because they're a threat to this imperial system, which doesn't make any sense. We're not even an industrial capitalistic country anymore.
But can
We're
America
actually
really, really be socialist?
finance.
If you
Finance
look
capitalism is nothing more than printing money,
at money,
and
okay.
and the only real money that America has is weapons. So they have to use those weapons to attack other countries to get their oil, but they're running out of productivity to do that. So now they're turning it in on the American population. This is not going to end well. But thank you. We're going to continue on this. Take us out, Falabi. Yeah.
Okay, basically. So we've been discussing Donald Trump conflict with the Federal Reserve Chief Powell and the implications of this and how this affects both the White House and the Federal Reserve. And from Mustafa and myself, we'll be back again to discuss more politics. It's bye for now.
All right. When you cut it off, I'll talk to you. Hey, you got it off? Yeah. Doesn't matter.